You're listening to the Renegade Blitz podcast, a podcast for Steelers fans by Steelers fans. Follow us on Twitter at Renegade Blitz, read articles on renegadeblitz.com, and like us on Facebook. And welcome back to the Renegade Blitz podcast. I'm Ty Polk, joined by Chris Ward, back with you to talk more about the Steelers offseason. We'd like to thank everyone for their support on YouTube. We have amassed over 100 subscribers. We're currently right now at last count 118. And again, thank you so much for supporting us since September 2020 of last year.
Yeah, we appreciate all the feedback and support for the podcast and on the website, on the Twitter page. It's much appreciated, and we look forward to giving more interviews here on the podcast with reporters. Hopefully maybe players, former players, or and then in the season we like to do our game previews with reporters or radio hosts from other teams, which is always a fun segment to do.
We will continue bringing that great content as always, and who knows, we might actually go get a couple other interviews outside of the football realm with authors of books like the new book from Bill Cowher, and of course a couple people that are very close to Steelers players. So before we get to our interview with Chris Carter, who actually was very much involved in this question on Twitter, Chris, I don't know if you've seen it, but Pittsburgh Clothing Company had a photo of, I guess you've kind of seen this with Unpopular Opinions. It's a picture of Patrick from SpongeBob SquarePants. I can't remember if it's in the Olympics episode or anything like that. I'm a aficionado on SpongeBob episodes, but basically Patrick's kind of tied up in a way or something like that. Say an unpopular Pittsburgh sports take that would have you ending up like this. And we've seen a couple out there. We'll get to Chris Carter's whenever we do the interview later on. But Chris, I want to get your thoughts on this. What is your unpopular take in Steelers history that might get you in trouble with a lot of the fan base?
It's a deep question that I probably have to think about a little bit more. Get in trouble with the fan base. It would probably be this past few months ago with Roethlisberger. I know the contract situation was kind of favorable to bring him back because he does give the Steelers the best chance to win this year. But I was kind of in the company of moving on from Roethlisberger. I know a bunch of other reporters kind of wrote the same thing.
Yeah, that's the one thing that's a good point, especially with now the added game and also the Steelers. You're supposed to take 3 preseason games. Well, the Steelers are still doing 4 anyways, and they don't have the best support for a bye week this year. Hopefully there's no COVID-19 concerns, but I think that's in the rearview mirror with everything going on. But again, that's a good point. One that I seen on Twitter was people saying that the Steelers should not have drafted Chase Claypool, which is hard to say when you had the impact he had in that one game against Philadelphia, 4 touchdowns. That was a star-making performance with you. But when you think about the Steelers' running back issues last year, you could have had J.K. Dobbins there. That was the pick available. I believe there was another running back. I can't remember off the top of my head. But I think it's a viable situation. But also, I look at it with Dobbins, how well he performed. When you look at Lamar Jackson over there, that's the ultimate decoy with the read option right there. So I don't know if his success would have been duplicated with the Steelers, but yeah, it would have been nice to see what would happen if he would have maybe masked some of the maladies with the Steelers running game, but I certainly doubt that. All right, so we've had our fun with the unpopular moments of the Steelers. It's now time to get to our next interview. And we welcome back Chris Carter, Pitt and Steelers writer for DKPittsburghSports and host of the Locked On Steelers podcast. Chris, thank you and welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me back, Tyler and Chris. Hope y'all been doing well with this, with this summer and getting to enjoy some nice weather out here.
Absolutely. Pittsburgh is beautiful this time of year. And man, it's really been a shift since the last time we talked to you. Last time we did, it was 10-0 Steelers. And then now it's, yeah, that's how it is. We've gone through rookie minicamp and the OTA sessions for the Steelers, and the actual minicamp for the entire team is next week.
Mm-hmm.
What are the things you've seen out of the Steelers that you have liked so far?
Well, one thing to remember, it is football in shorts. Even minicamp is still football in shorts. The things that we're seeing are very basic, very like even Chukuma Okorafor let us know on Thursday when he spoke after OTAs. He was saying like, listen, because people were saying like, oh, what do you think about this? He's like, listen, guys, like a lot of us are doing really well in some certain drills. It won't matter until the pads come on and you start seeing like how we actually play. So whenever you hear someone saying, oh, such and such is doing great or such and such is doing bad, take it with the grain of salt. Like you're kind of like, okay, we're taking note that this happened, but there's been plenty of times guys who have been great in OTAs have stunk in camp and then not made the team. And there's times that people have not been great in OTAs and then been phenomenal in camp and then make the team. I will say this. I think Shakur Brown is coming along as a slot option. I think they like Trey Norwood a little bit. The overwhelming sense that if you were to take one thing from OTAs is that Najee Harris is the real deal. And that's beyond what you see in OTAs. That's what everyone is saying when they step out of OTAs and we talk to them on Zoom after the practices. Because when you talk to them and you ask anybody about Najee, like they take a step back and they say, oh man, yeah, that guy, because he's that locked in. Like, I'm sure you've heard the stories where Ben Roethlisberger said, like, the running back coach, Eddie Faulkner, was like, hey, Najee, I got to go home, man. Like, let's stop working out for a little bit. But that's the intensity that he's bringing. And I got to say his personality, his focus, and the things that he's showing in practice, that's the ultimate highlight of the OTAs, is just how good he looks and how good everyone feels about him being on the team. If there's one thing to take away from OTAs, it's that he's done everything and more that you could expect of him at this point.
Yeah, just from looking at the photos on Steelers.com, he looks so much bigger than the other running back. He's just real lean, and it's going to be really exciting to see him once this fall, once the season starts. But also the videos that appear on Twitter too. Just you're right. He just looks like he's a step above of especially the running backs. Yeah,
I mean, when you look at his legs, they are extremely thick. I saw someone make a joke and say, "Look at his legs compared to Adrian Peterson." Well, one thing to remember, Adrian Peterson is in his mid-30s. Like, naturally, Najee Harris is just going to be at a different point in his career. But Najee Harris has said before that Adrian Peterson was his idolized running back growing up, and that's who he wanted to play like. And when you think about leg strength, Adrian Peterson is the picture in my mind. One thing you should go back and do, if you ever get a chance, go back and watch like Adrian Peterson's like prime days of being a running back. So many times, if he got tackled and he was on the ground, you would see him get up without using his hands. Now, that may sound like, okay, who cares? But when you go back and you look at the film and you see like, okay, he's literally just taking his one foot, putting on the ground and propelling his whole body up. You try laying down and not using your hands to get up every single time. And while you're running, at the fastest that you can to get around guys and getting hit by guys, that man was a freakish athlete. And if Najee Harris is on that level, man, the Steelers are in for some serious years of running the ball.
I like this. But there's another thing to talk about this week, and that's always JuJu Smith-Schuster. He's out here with the Boku no Hero haircut, if you're a fan of anime like I am. But he also said that he's expecting to take more snaps from the outside compared to where he's made a lot of his money, at least in the slot. But he also said that Ray McCloud, of all people, is the new slot receiver for the Steelers. I know that you're very familiar with personnel, so my first question for this, it really can't be McCloud. I mean, you expect him to be the special teams guy, basically the kick returner, punt returner, and that the slot guy would probably be James Washington or maybe Deontay Johnson.
So a few things here. When he said that, I think people misinterpreted it as if he was saying, I want to line up on the outside all the time. he's just asking for more of a mix-up. And I broke down the numbers in my article on DKPittsburghSports.com that everyone should go check out, where I broke down explaining what he was saying. In 2020, in the Steelers offense, he lined up in the slot 79% of the time. In 2019, it was 63% of the time. In 2018, it was 58% of the time. And what JuJu even said at another point during that same Zoom call was saying, like, hey, like, I'm not saying just put me outside. I'm saying that when we line up and I'm just consistently in the slot, the other team knows it. And that's the thing, is that you want to create mismatches. You want to create confusion on the defense. But when you send him and Deontay and Chase Claypool out there, just to say 3 receivers, a tight end, and a running back, and the defense is able to say, oh, wow, JuJu's lining up in the slot, they know what matchups they're getting. But when you mix it up, and it doesn't have to be majority of him outside of the slot, but at 58%, mix it up, get another guy, get other guys in that position. Now, if he lines up outside and you put Deontay there, or you put James there, or you put Chase there, you put Ray there, now you're like, okay, crap. We wanted a certain guy to line up with JuJu in the slot, but now JuJu's lined up outside the numbers. We got to do this. This might mix up our thinking here a little bit. It's just another thing you can do to confuse defenses, and that's all you're really trying to do half the time, is just confuse defenses, make them have to take a couple extra steps of thinking, because every extra step of thinking they have to do, that's more processing that they have to do, and then that's more time for you to execute your game plan and catch them off guard.
JuJu being, like you mentioned, that almost 80% in the slot. Like, do you think Peter misused him last year? Because that's a pretty high percentage for him just to be in the slot.
I do think he did. Not just for being in the slot, but also all the short routes that he ran. JuJu's very good at catching the ball in traffic and getting extra yards. He excelled at that. I think he had either the first or the second most third down conversions when catching the ball in those situations in the NFL. I know he had at least had the first or second or most in the slot out of that. He had the most touchdowns out of the slot last year. Like, he does well there, but it's also about mixing it up. Like, if you remember that Colts game, when they finally targeted him downfield, that's when the offense opened up, because then the Colts were like, oh crap, they're throwing the ball 20 yards down the field. What are we going to do now? We have to think about this. And then the Steelers offense got back to what it was in the first 10 games of the season compared to the last 5 or 6. So, yeah, I do think he was misused. And as much as some of it might have been Ben Roethlisberger just saying, hey, I want this type of a look, this year, Matt Canada's task is developing an offense that says, hey, Ben, you need to play to this style. You need to target the ball down the field more. We're going to do these things. It's not just going to be about what you think should be the offense. You're going to play to what we're dictating, says, like, hey, this is what the other team's doing. This is how we're going to attack. And there's going to be times you want Ben to improvise, just not as much as he did last year. So I do think it was a mistake, and I'm interested to see how Matt Canada uses this offense and who he highlights.
Well, another question with that is that the Steelers seem to be wanting to run more, I formation 2 tight end sets. So if you were the offensive coordinator in this situation, who would be the outside threats in 2 receiver sets for the Steelers?
If I were to do it on the majority of snaps, I'd have Claypool and Deontay being my guys on the majority of snaps. Now, and again, you're looking at rotation, keeping guys fresh, trying to get different things, because also there's different things you want to do. Like, JuJu's a better blocker than Deontay. So say you were going out there for a run play, and that you were looking at a couple run looks, pre-snap, you want to have that receiver in motion and maybe have them crack down on a linebacker. You'd want JuJu to do that, or Claypool to do that. You wouldn't want Deontay Johnson or Ray McLeod to do that. So it's about mixing it up. But the 2 most dangerous guys that line up outside for the Steelers are those 2 guys. The other thing to remember here is that plenty of those deep targets that Ben Roethlisberger threw last year were down the sideline. They were just regular old go routes where it's much tougher to connect on those when you're just going in a straight line and you have to connect outside the numbers, and the cornerback can pinch you to the sideline. What Matt Canada's, if you're a Steelers fan, you're hoping Matt Canada is doing right now is working more of those deep middle of the field throws in, especially with the run game that they're hoping to have. If Najee Harris runs the football well and teams respect him and they start to come up a little bit, that's going to open up the middle of the field for more opportunities, and that's going to lead to better deep passing opportunities and chances for Ben Roethlisberger and this offense. But if I was to have two guys, Chase and Deontay would be the primary options out there. But again, I would heed JuJu's words in saying mixing it up could help the offense.
I wanted to ask about the offensive line with Adrian Clem, because the offensive linemen during the OTAs, they praised him about what he's bringing to the offensive line, his aggressive coaching philosophy. What do you have thought about that, hearing that and everything? And do you think they'll bring a more physical presence in 2021?
I mean, I think that's the goal. Yeah. Adrian Clem has talked about running through people's faces and talking about like getting more physical. When you watch the Steelers run game last year, when they run block, their goal was to get in position and then wall guys off. It wasn't to plow them over. And I think part of it was conserving their offensive line because they had a lot of older guys, and they also wanted to protect Ben Roethlisberger because they knew if, like, when you're playing more physical like that, you are more at risk to get injured. And in fact, I mean, go back to the early to mid 2000s when they did play that way. And there were plenty of years, Marquise Pouncey, Marcus Gilbert, David DeCastro, that they went down for injuries while they were playing that physical style of football. But that's where it's like, okay, we can't be afraid of getting hurt. That's where the Steelers' mind is right now. So if they're gonna take that approach this year, I think it's because they're younger on the offensive line. They're trusting that they're gonna make it through that. And this year, you're gonna be asking them to bowl guys over instead of wall guys off. And when you're walling guys off, you're giving them a chance to counter what you do on the ground. So I think it's gonna help their run game, and I think it's actually gonna look a lot different for people. And people will be refreshed by that. I also think Kevin Dotson is highly underrated. I think that guy's going to be a lot better than most people give him credit for. So there's that.
Speaking of which, just in terms of an offensive thing with Harris, do you expect the Steelers to run more mesh patterns with him? Wheel routes from the running back, stuff like that.
I mean, a little. I don't think it's going to be.
It's not NCAA football out there, basically.
Right. Like, I don't think it's going to be crazy stuff. I think occasionally they'll work it in, but I still see the primary part of this team is going to be running the football and using more play action and catching guys off guard and finding a way to balance keeping the defense on their toes. Because what happens so many times is that when you get into how well you play the offense, which I think is a big part of what happened late last year, the Steelers were really good at the short passing game. And then they were really good at sometimes connecting on the deep ball when the short passing game was going. But when teams keyed in on, oh, wait, they don't run the ball that well late in the season, that's when the other stuff could be focused on and the opportunities weren't there as much. Or there were opportunities and Ben Roethlisberger just wasn't seeing them because he was too focused in on these certain ways of winning. It's about finding that balance. So that's going to be the focus of the offense this year, figuring out how to balance and how to keep teams off guard, but maybe not necessarily a specific, a wheel route or a mesh, combination, and just trying to catch these things there. I do think that there's going to be a few different looks that we haven't seen before, but it's going to be about how those play calls are meshed together and then how they're executed. Because at the bottom line is, if the play calls will be all great, but if the guys don't catch the ball, if the guys don't block, if Najee doesn't hit the right hole, it doesn't matter what play you call. And I think that happened a few times with Benny Snell and the running backs when they had 3rd and 1 and the right hole was there and they just ran into the back of their own team and nothing came of it. So it's going to be about how they execute it. But I don't think there's going to be one concept that you're like, whoa, that is the new whole trick of this offense. It's going to be a combination of things.
You touched a little bit on what you expect from Matt Canada's offense, but how do you think Ben Roethlisberger will adapt to the offense? And do you see him going under center more and running play action?
So a few things. One, Ben kind of made it clear. He's like, hey, I have no problem lining up under center, which a lot of people would raise their eyebrows at because he hasn't lined up much under center in recent years. But part of it also is it's just easier to line up in the shotgun nowadays. When you're lining up under center, you're wasting time and movement to back up sometimes. And when they had Le'Veon Bell lining up in the shotgun and running out of the shotgun, it was no problem. You just handed it to the guy and he went. And I think with Najee Harris, you get that kind of guy again. But when you had a James Conner who was more limited as a runner, sometimes you'd want him to have those 4 or 5 steps to build up his momentum. But before he got the ball, I don't think that's going to be too much of a challenge for him. I think he's going to adapt to what's needed of him. But I do think that he's embracing this new offense because he wants to win. At least JuJu Smith-Schuster was like, listen, Ben's asking more questions than I am, which isn't normal. So I also think part of this is Ben's tired of the talk. He's tired of the Mike Tannenbaum saying he's the worst quarterback in the AFC North. He's tired of people saying the Steelers stink and they stink because of him. I think he does. First of all, we know he hears those things. We know that's just Ben he's been throughout his career, right? He hears those things. But now I think it's going to be more about like he's like, all right, I'm tired of y'all saying these things. I'm going to prove y'all wrong in these situations. So I'm interested to see if he plays up to that. But we'll see how he actually embraces the playbook when they start actually playing games.
Yeah. I'm really interested to see the play action because Pro Football Focus and different analytics sites, they say like their play action rate for the last like 4 years or so like been like drastically down compared to the rest of the league. So I'm interested to see if they run more play action under Canada's offense.
Yeah, I mean, possibly. You got to remember though, the last 3 years they haven't had a primary running back. I mean, James Conner's been their guy, but James Conner was not Le'Veon Bell. So, and Le'Veon Bell, even in himself, was a special running back. The way that he played was different than your traditional Dalvin Cooks or your Derrick Henrys. This was a guy who caught the ball in the backfield extremely well and could line up in the slot and play receiver and do all these other things. I think there's more reasons behind that than just Ben didn't want to. It's just more so, hey, these are the things that we do well. We're going to play to this strength.
There was one thing that Ben mentioned. He said that he felt worn down at the end of the year last year.
Yeah.
But I felt personally it was more the knees after the Dallas game that kind of spelled his, demise in a way. But how do you feel about his arm holding up in the second year after the surgery?
Well, one thing to remember, and this is what he said when he was talking about why he felt worn down. He threw over 1,000 passes before like training camp even started last year because he needed to rehab his arm. That was the thing, is that it wasn't like oh man, it was just the wear and tear of the season. It was that from when he got his surgery in the winter and then when he was recovering from January all the way to July, he was throwing tons of passes. He was letting the ball go, and that can wear you down. And when you get through the season, you're going to start to feel that even more. So his thing now is that he's like, hey, I know where I kind of broke things down last year. And there's been those questions for months now, right? Was it his knees? Were his knees going? But I think it is obvious that there was something ailing him. And if he's talking about his arm being there, because here's the thing, at this point of the stage right now, like, it's June of 2021. If it was his knees, I feel like he would have said that. Ben's never been shy about how he's hurt or what he's going through, right? So if it was his knees, I think we would have seen him go out and definitively say, yeah, my knees were just shot last year. And just from getting back to the game, I think it was more of his arm, just kind of like, hey, like, you've thrown a lot this year, a lot more, like 3 or 4 times more than you normally do. So, you're a little tuckered out. And I think that definitely impacted his thought process and how he went through his fundamentals last year, especially late last year. But I mean, you saw early last year, he was hurling the ball down the field, no problem. 84-yard touchdown passes to Chase Claypool. I think that if he manages himself well over the next few months, I think he will be fine come the Steelers season.
And it's clear cut that Harris is going to be the bell cow running back. But who do you think will be the number 2 guy? Do you see like Balaj or Benny Snell possibly? How do you see that shaking out behind Harris?
Well, as soon as Kalen Balaj was signed, I said on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I was like, whoa, like that's a warning shot to Benny Snell and everyone else in that backfield. It's like, listen, if you don't shape up, this guy takes your job. I think it could be Kalen Balaj. He has the speed. He has the size. He's a veteran. And to be honest, this puts the pressure on Benny Snell. Like, look, man, like, you've been exciting when you see it and everything's right in front of you and you can charge forward and be physical and aggressive. But the problem is your vision has stunk. You haven't read the holes well. You haven't reacted well. I wonder if that's going to play out the way that Benny Snell hopes it does. But Kalen Ballage to me is an insurance package, and I think that so far he looks like he is the number 2 back, at least from this. But again, it's way too early. Like, I'm saying that just based off of a couple practices where we've seen them run drills and, okay, he looks like he can do this, but it could very well be that he's the 3rd option or the 4th option, or doesn't even make the team, and Benny Snell and Anthony McFarland and Jalen Samuels are your top guys behind Najee this year.
Yeah, I saw on Good Morning Football this past week that Nate Burleson said that he thought Najee Harris and Benny Snell would be like one of the top duos in the league for running back. So I don't know. I can see Harris being kind of like what you said. I'm not too sure on Snell yet, really.
I think the big thing is also having someone to feed off, because there's plenty of times where you've seen a running back do better because there's another running back around them. And teams, when they come out and they try to stop the run, they primarily focus on that bell cow. But when that second guy comes in and he's a change of pace and he goes a different way, it's a little bit of an adjustment, and that gives that running back more opportunities to make plays. Case in point, Mwelde Moore was not the same kind of running back that Willie Parker was in the late 2000s, but he was an extremely good backup running back for the Steelers in those era because of what he did, and people didn't really prepare for him. And he had a couple 100-yard games where he started in place of Willie, and it worked out. I really think that there could be a chance for something along those lines for Benny Snell, not in the same way, of course, because he's a completely different running back than Mwelde Moore, but if he's able to embrace this role, he could be the guy that is like, when Najee's wearing people down, he wears them down further. And because it's tough to be physical, it's tough to tackle, it's tough to hit every play. And then if the Steelers are gaining 4 or 5 yards with each of those carries with Najee Harris, okay, put in Benny Snell, and now you get some fresh legs. And now I got to deal with this guy who's got fresh legs and is feeling it, and he's even more physical. So I think they could be a decent pair, but I got to see more from Benny Snell, and I got to see just how Najee does actually play on the field for the Steelers, because we've seen several times when a player looks great in college, says a lot of great things in OTAs and training camp, and then just doesn't do anything.
Well, one guy that's been getting a lot of buzz around Steelers Nation is former Colts safety and Newcastle native Malik Hooker. He's coming off an Achilles injury last year, and he had a meeting over a week ago with the Steelers. If he were signed to a contract, what would his role and impact be on the team?
I think he would be the deep safety option next to Minkah Fitzpatrick. Terrell Edmunds is much better when he plays in the slot and he plays in the box and he plays closer to the line of scrimmage, because then he's aggressive. He can hit more, and he can use that athleticism and size to challenge a variety of players. But he's not as proficient in deep coverage, and that's where Malik Hooker would come into play. And honestly, if they sign Malik Hooker, I don't think they would even need a slot corner as much, because they'd have 3 safeties who can kind of rotate around and take care of different things. And that'll be the boost in the secondary that they need, while Joe Hayden and Cameron Sutton lock it up on the outside.
So you're saying that you would probably put Terrell Edmunds as the slot corner in that situation?
More of a box guy that could bump in to help the slot. Like, you'd still have a Shakur Brown coming in situations, but I would make him available for that, because one thing that Terrell Edmunds has shown is that he can stop, turn, and quickly accelerate in different directions and cover different styles of receivers. He's covered running backs well. He's covered wide receivers well. He's covered tight ends well. He does those things well, and that's where I think the Steelers need to keep him, because I think that he covers up a lot of their problems.
Talking about that with the secondary and stuff, how worried are you about the depth at cornerback? And
if you're looking at it, you are concerned that you don't necessarily have the answer at outside corner already behind Cameron Sutton and Joe Hayden. I'm fully confident in Cameron Sutton. It's funny, I started going to games the year that he was a rookie and covering them, and he was one of the first people that I talked to that was like straight football talk. Like, he knows the game extremely well. I think Steelers fans who think that he's going to be some big letdown from Steven Nelson don't know who Cameron Sutton is just yet. And I think he's going to surprise some people. But James Pierre has shown some promise. Justin Lane, I don't know about, still got to see what he does. But I do think that it wouldn't hurt them to add another piece there just to protect themselves. But as far as the starters, they're fine. Depth wise, I do think they could use at least either someone stepping up or someone just or someone actually just being like, hey, like we expect this of you, and them getting the job done.
Devin Bush, do you think he can cover Jarvis Landry in the slot? Because it seems like the Steelers are still going towards linebackers covering wide receiver, ones, twos, threes, whatever it takes, just no matter what.
I discussed this on Saturday on the Lolly Carter Steelers podcast with Dale Lolly. So, first of all, when he's saying he can cover Jarvis Landry, he's not saying he could cover him all game long for 10-second long plays. He's saying he can cover him for about 4 or 5 seconds while the heat gets home. Because if Devin Bush is covering somebody, that means the Steelers are blitzing. And it means they're hoping to get home before something crazy happens in the pass game. But also, he is like faster than Jarvis Landry. When you look at them on tape and you look at their numbers, he ran a 4.42. Like he can get moving. That's the thing about him, is he could run with him. It's a lot to challenge the ball while it's in the air. It's a lot to mirror routes. But it's also not this blasphemy that people say when a linebacker's covering a receiver. Why are the Steelers the only team that this happens to? This happens to every NFL team. And in fact, it happens to teams the Steelers play because they get that. They force teams that. Go back and look at what Chase Claypool did to the Eagles. So many times they line up in the middle of the formation. The Eagles couldn't really do anything. They had to cover. They had to cover the field, and they're like, okay, well, we can't take our top cornerback and move him inside because JuJu and Deontay are outside. So we got to have our guys, run with Chase Claypool, and the only guy there is a linebacker because we needed to keep linebackers on the field to stop the run. And now all of a sudden, whoops, he's up against a linebacker and it's a touchdown. And is that, oh my God, the Eagles defensive coordinator is stupid? No, it's just that's how mismatches work in today's NFL. It's a big part of the game. It doesn't just happen to Keith Butler and the Steelers, which I think Steelers fans lose their minds about way too often. And even like some analysts talk about it like it's the gospel. And I'm like, guys, I watch the Patriots in the Bill Belichick, Tom Brady years. It happens to them all the time. Mismatches will occur, but what helps cover it up is when you have athletic linebackers like Devin Bush who can minimize how much time that those guys are open to start a play when the other team gets those mismatches. And then while they're getting those mismatches, you might be getting a mismatch as far as rushing the quarterback. And you might get somewhere where TJ Watt or Vince Williams or Robert Spillane or Stephon Tuitt, they're getting a look that they really like, and they got to win their job. So is he going to cover him 24/7? No, but he is, he is going to help against that.
And we have one more question after this one, but I have to ask about Dwayne Haskins. Do you think he has potential and promise? We'll have to find out in preseason. That's when we'll really see. But just as far as OTAs, and Roethlisberger was kind of like raving about him a few weeks ago. There was pretty interesting because Roethlisberger usually doesn't give unprompted praise like that often. So, what are your thoughts on Haskins?
I really see Dwayne Haskins as still a project. He has a powerful arm. That's why he was a first round draft pick. He has the build to be the quarterback. He's got to get out of his own head. He's got to just play football, and he's got to read the field well. If he does those things, he'll be pushing Mason Rudolph for the number 2 position this year, and then we'll see what happens next year with who gets kept around. Could he bounce back? Yes. Would I bet on it? No. It's always a tough look to bet on a quarterback who has bounced between teams to figure it out and get there. And again, it doesn't mean that they can't. I mean, there's reclamation stories all over the place at quarterback, like with Kurt Warner. But gambling on like should the Steelers put their chips down on Dwayne Haskins? No, but I wouldn't be surprised if he went into this training camp and then went into this preseason and performed as well as Mason Rudolph. And then people are like, oh, who should be the number 2 quarterback? And then there's a conversation after this season about who should be the next guy to step up, even if Ben stays back another year. So I'm not going to say that Dwayne Haskins he's definitely lining himself up for that, but he has the opportunity to. It's just going to be about how hard does he commit to learning the Steelers offense, to being proficient with the offense, and getting to know his new team. If he embraces those things, I think he can be a dangerous quarterback to deal with. If he doesn't, he'll be out of here in a year.
And we seen your post on Twitter from the Pittsburgh Clothing Company asking about unpopular thoughts about Pittsburgh sports teams. And you said the Steelers should have drafted Lamar Jackson. You want to talk about blasphemy? You should see your mentions. Like clockwork, people flamed you. So you have your time on this show to just talk about. I've seen some of the things, but I want you to elaborate if you can.
All right, Steelers fans, hear me out. First of all, in that draft class where there was Baker Mayfield and Josh Rosen and Josh Allen and I forget who the even other fourth quarterback was. Was it Sam Darnold? I think it was Sam Darnold.
It was Darnold.
You look at those four guys that went ahead of him. The only one who I was like really hyped on was Josh Allen. The other three, I was like, meh. I didn't believe in Baker. I still don't believe in Baker. I still don't believe in Sam Darnold. Josh Rosen, I think, has shown what the deal was there. Josh Allen was the one guy, but I also knew Josh Allen wasn't going to be available when the Steelers picked. That whole draft, if anyone was subscribed to DKPittsburghSports.com now, these articles are gone because we had some technical issues, but I was beating the drum for the Steelers to draft Lamar Jackson that year. I followed his career in Louisville, and I was like, look, I'm not saying he's going to start right away. Just stash him on your roster. Just let him play a couple games whenever Ben gets hurt, and he'll be a competitive quarterback. I was big on him then, and ever since he's been with the Ravens, like when he went to the Ravens, I was like, uh-oh. And my whole theory behind why they should have drafted him, mind you, this is the 2018 NFL draft. Their first round pick was Terrell Edmunds, and I'm a Terrell Edmunds guy. Like I believe that Terrell Edmunds is a good player, and he's continuing to improve. But if you had drafted Lamar Jackson there, think of it this way, fellas. Not only do you have the quarterback that is ready to go when Ben Roethlisberger goes down in 2019, and I don't care what anybody says. They're like, oh, he wouldn't fit the system. Listen, the system is for Lamar Jackson. If the play ain't there, run the doggone ball. And he runs the ball, and he's better than running the ball than Mason Rudolph and Patrick Mahomes. Like that. That's where he excels. And that's where the Steelers could have used him a lot in 2019. Like if anyone thinks that Lamar Jackson would have been on the 2019 Steelers and they wouldn't have been better than Devlin Hodges or Mason Rudolph, you're on crack. Like that's just, you're losing your doggone mind. Now I will, and this is my big thing, even above Lamar Jackson simply playing for the Steelers, it's taking him away from the Ravens. People forget in 2018, middle of the season, the Ravens were dead in the water. They had no hopes. Joe Flacco was stinking up the joint. There were rumors abound. They were rumors to the point where they're saying it's not a rumor. It's a fact that once this season is over, John Harbaugh is gone, and both sides will be happy about it because of how bad the Ravens looked at the time. But when Lamar Jackson went in, they all of a sudden got a little bit better. And then they started winning games. And then he was the reason that they were winning games. And the quarterback position wasn't a detriment. It was an asset. And it flipped their season around, and they ended up winning the division that year. And if Lamar Jackson was a backup on the Steelers roster, that never happens. So you know what happens in 2018? The Ravens don't make the playoffs. John Harbaugh gets fired. They completely fall apart as an organization. And you know who does make the playoffs? The Steelers, because they would have won the division. And you know what else probably happens there? AB probably doesn't explode at the end of the season when he basically knew that they were out of the playoffs. So AB maybe is still around, still playing, still doing something. And then in 2019, you're again in a different place where you got Lamar Jackson back there. And whether or not he's your guy in 2020, the Ravens also wouldn't have been a thing in 2019. Because then you're making the playoffs with Lamar Jackson or Mason Rudolph or Devlin Hodges or whoever your quarterback would have been that year. So my whole thing with if they drafted Lamar Jackson, they would have prevented the Ravens from making the rise that has kept them relevant. Because let's be honest, you take away Lamar Jackson from that team right now, they are not a contender. They are not the same team that they are. You slap a Mason Rudolph on that roster right now. They aren't winning the division in 2018 or 19. They aren't making the playoffs in 2020. It's been Lamar Jackson carrying that team. Hollywood Brown hasn't worked out. Mark Andrews drops like 8% of his passes. Again, I know people in Pittsburgh hate Lamar Jackson because he's a Raven. They say, oh, he's a running back. He's not really a quarterback. Okay, well, what running backs that throw 36 touchdowns and 6 interceptions in a year on top of running for 7 touchdowns? that's where I think Steelers fans delude themselves on these things. So again, I'm not saying that Lamar Jackson would have saved the franchise and that they would be Super Bowl champions because of him, but you would have kept him off the Ravens. You would have made the playoffs for 2 years in a row. And really, that means from 2014 to 2020, you would have made the playoffs all 7 of those years. And we saw in 2018, even though they missed the playoffs, they were the last team to beat the Patriots, who were the Super Bowl champions. They were one step from beating the Saints in their own stadium, which no one did until the playoffs. That team could have competed down the stretch and done more. And if you keep Lamar Jackson off the Ravens, maybe they get the opportunity to do that. So that's the only reason I'm saying that for.
You put a compelling argument out there. I mean, you can't really say that that's wrong. And I'll put you are right about that with the Ravens. I do believe in some aspects, especially with how they've been depleted on defense, losing Judon, but they still have the secondary and everything like that. One false move, and I don't think it's the Steelers finishing dead last in the division. I think it's actually the Ravens.
Right. Like that's where I'm like right now. I'm sitting here and I'm sitting like okay, Lamar Jackson, you take him off that Ravens team, who's really their best assets? Do you think Gus Edwards is really doing all that when everyone can look at him the way they looked at James Conner? Like, oh, we know that Ben's not running the ball, so we're coming after you. The whole reason that their running offense work is because of Lamar Jackson, because of the threat that he constantly poses. And again, look at their receiving core. Miles Boykin, no. They get plenty of opportunities. Lamar Jackson throws better balls than people give him credit for. And when he like people look back and talk about, oh, what about him in the playoffs? Well, when they lost to the Titans 2 years ago in the playoffs, there were, I think, 2 or 3 interceptions he threw that bounced off of Mark Andrews' hands. And they were in the red zone. Like, if he caught them, they're first downs or touchdowns, and they keep them in that game. And he had like 500 yards of offense in that game, even with all those drops. That's what I'm saying there, is that I think he's better than people give him credit for. And again, taking him away from them would just put the Steelers in a better situation. And you're right. If they crumble like that and they get rid of their coach, who knows where the Ravens would have fallen by now. And I saw someone was like, oh, well, they would have drafted a top 10 quarterback. Oh, you mean like Tua Tagovailoa or any of the other. I mean, it was brought up that from 2009 to 2016, no first round draft pick quarterback is still on the team that drafted them from in the drafts from 2009 to 2016. Like, come on,
Yeah, I agree with the. I don't understand the strong dislike for Jackson. I know he's a Raven, but from Steeler fans, because I like the way he plays. Like, his style of plays is fun to watch, and he's a great guy off the field also. But in this hypothetical situation, how do you think Roethlisberger would have responded if they drafted Jackson there in the first round?
Remember, he hated the Mason Rudolph pick. I mean, that's 93.7. I know this. I know this. Lamar Jackson's a way better quarterback, college prospect too, than Mason Rudolph was. There would have been definite heat.
Oh, there would have been. I think there would have been. And that might have caused some – and I saw some people said that, and I'm like, yeah, Ben would have objected. But if I'm the organization, I'm like, you know what? Play better. Be the Ben Roethlisberger that we know you to be, and you will keep your job, and it's no worries. But we know you got 2-3 years left in the tank. I mean, again, the year after they drafted Mason Rudolph, he went down with an elbow injury for the entire season. So it's like, dude, like, that's why they drafted Mason Rudolph, because they don't know how much you got left and how or what you're going to be able to do in your late 30s. So he might have objected, but that's where the Steelers should have been like, hey man, dude was there. But again, I'm not saying the Steelers are dumb for not taking Lamar Jackson. I said it then, and I still say it now, that would have been a better pick than Terrell Edmunds at that point. And I think that there's a chance that Terrell Edmunds might have been around in the second round of the draft, and they had been able to find another receiver other than James Washington. And then again, you don't need to draft Mason Rudolph in the third round at that point. So maybe things would have worked out differently. But that's one of those fun what if moments. Like, if you ever watch or read Dave Damashek's work from back in the day, he used to do a lot of the what if NFL verse, like, what if this team did this decision? Like, one of my favorite what ifs. If the Steelers, okay, you guys remember the end of the 2006 season when Bill Cowher's last year, they're in Cincinnati, they're out of the playoffs, but it's overtime, and Santonio Holmes takes the ball into the end zone, knocks the Bengals out of the playoffs, and the Steelers finish 8-8. If he doesn't do that, the Steelers finish 7-9. They would have jumped up I believe, 5 or 7 draft picks. And instead of Lawrence Timmons that year, they draft Patrick Willis. Now, imagine a Steelers defense with Patrick Willis in the late 2000s. Good night, best defense of all time.
My God. You just literally just made my brain explode right now. Like my face is like, oh my God, that would have been murder.
I thought you were going to say
that's
Revis,
pure murder. The only question is like, I guess could Willis have been an outside linebacker?
Well, he didn't need to be. Lawrence Timmons still lined up inside predominantly. Like he lined up on outside to help. But I mean, they had Lamar Woodley and James Harrison.
That's right. Those two were the outside linebackers. He still would have been. He's right or left middle linebacker.
Yeah.
Oh, that would have been murder.
It would have been Patrick Willis and James Ferry with Larry Foote coming off the bench.
Oh my God, that's murder.
Exactly. But again, this is the fun of the what if verse whenever you want to do these moments. And again, it's June. Like, I don't do this stuff during the season because I got enough content and things to break down at that time. But when you think about those fun moments, like what if they had drafted Lamar Jackson? Maybe they make the playoffs for 7 years in a row. Maybe in 2018, they make a run late in the season. AB doesn't go crazy and they're in a completely different situation right now. Who knows what would have happened, if they had done that, and does it matter right now? Not really, but it was one of those things where they're doing the Patrick Star meme where he's, chained up in town square and what Pittsburgh sports opinion would have you like this. I'm like, I got one easy. Lamar Jackson. People hate Lamar Jackson in this town. So I'm going to say if the Steelers would have drafted him, people are going to hate me. And that's exactly what happened in my mentions. But I do appreciate y'all hearing me out because there's a legit argument here. This isn't bogus stuff. This isn't, they should have, they should have drafted Xavier Howard. Like, okay, yeah, everyone would have drafted Xavier Howard if they knew that he was a superstar cornerback, that went to the second round. But, this was one where it was like, I felt like he was the guy at the time. And I've heard from guys, when Lamar Jackson was drafted, I was still a part-timer at DK. So I wasn't full-time and on the Steelers beat like I am. Well, I'm still not even really on the Steelers beat all the time because I do Pitt stuff. But I know that when I was told from someone who was in the Steelers draft room when they had made the announcement that Mike Tomlin went to the podium, announced Terrell Edmunds, and then went to a TV. And when he looked up at the TV, watching the picks that came after the Steelers, he saw Lamar Jackson get picked by the Ravens. And the guy who told me this said that Mike Tomlin clapped his hands and walked out the door. Now, that might not have meant nothing, but to me, it sounds like Mike really wanted Lamar and maybe got outvoted. But again, that's neither here nor there. I think that I think they're still fine to compete with Ben Roethlisberger this year. I just think it's funny to think about, like, would the Ravens be relevant right now if they didn't have Lamar Jackson? I don't think they would. Now, maybe they stumble on to, a quarterback situation. Maybe I don't think they're bad enough to get first overall in those years and get a Kyler Murray. But, I do think that the Ravens would have been. I mean, imagine the Ravens if they had Mason Rudolph right now. I think the Steelers could beat that team a lot, and I think that they do better in the division than them all 3 of those years. So again, just having some fun.
And that's Chris Carter, Pitt and Steelers writer for DK Pittsburgh Sports and the Locked On Steelers podcast. Chris, thank you for your clarification on the Lamar Jackson tweet, and we hope to talk to you again, man.
Hey, always fun to be here with you guys. You guys have a great time.
We've kind of covered a lot of what's been going on around the NFL for the Steelers, but Chris, I want to talk about something that's really near and dear to a lot of older Pittsburgh sports fans, older Pittsburgh football fans, and really if you're fans of 4 letters that used to mean so much to what football really is today, and that's the USFL. In spring 2022, the USFL was joining the ranks of the many spring football leagues that have popped up in and around the XFL's time. And there's a rumor that one of the 8 starting teams in this new USFL league is the Pittsburgh Maulers. If the Maulers are back in Pittsburgh, we're covering them. We are covering them. At the very least, I am covering them because I'm the one that's on the ground in Pittsburgh right now. I am going to do everything in my power to make sure that we get a press pass for that because this I gotta see in person. I've heard so much about the USFL as a kid. I watched the 30 for 30 on Who Killed the USFL. is possibly the best opportunity for young content creators like ourselves and probably other people around there. If the USFL gets into Pittsburgh, I want us to be the first Pittsburgh Maulers blog. That's what we deserve right now. We couldn't be the first Steelers blog. There's too much, but I know this. I want to be boots on the ground when the Maulers play in either Heinz Field, Highmark Stadium, Campbell Stadium out in Steel Valley. I don't care where. I want to be there.
Yeah, I think that would be. I'm a fan of the spring. It's unfortunate that a lot of them lately have folded and stuff. What's the news with the XFL right now? Or is the USFL going to be competing with them, or how's that going to work out?
I have no idea with that. I think The Rock's still trying to get everything together with that.
Who's going to be owning the USFL, the new USFL?
Doug Flutie.
And are they on Fox?
Doug Flutie, I don't know if he's the owner, but Doug Flutie is the face of this new USFL, and Doug Flutie did play in the USFL, and there's really been a big push for feeder leagues out there. Yeah. And I don't know if you notice this right now. There is a spring football league currently playing right now.
Yeah, I did hear. What is the league called?
The spring league? I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know, but I've seen it a couple times on Fox Sports, but this feels like another an XFL. Like this could be legit.
Yeah,
in terms of what it is.
Hopefully, another sports team in Pittsburgh. I could probably see them playing in Highmark Stadium. I don't know Heinz Field. I don't know if they'll get into there, but I could see Highmark being a perfect location for them to have their game.
Really, there's another opportunity for them. They could go play on the campus of Duquesne if they still want to stay in downtown Pittsburgh. But the USFL, they did get some success into getting into big pro stadiums, and I'm pretty sure with the climate of everything with COVID-19, even though it'll be a year past all of that, any opportunity a stadium gets to make money, I'm pretty sure they wouldn't mind taking that opportunity.
Yeah,
but
up for that lost revenue.
But I think you are right with it most likely going to be in Highmark Stadium, and high school football has been playing in that stadium, so it is the most likely situation out there. I mean, are you excited for this? I feel like I'm the one that's actually treading water on this podcast about this. I'm all in, man.
I don't know much about, but I'm definitely down to see the Maulers come back to Pittsburgh. I see the vintage shirts in the Strip District. Of course, that was before both of our time. Really, it was more in the '90s. So I wasn't around for the Maulers back then. But I'm like I said, I'm a fan of feeder leagues or any type of other football leagues because it's hard. The chances of making that up are very slim, and there's a lot of Division I college players out there that don't get the chance to play in the NFL, or they do make it, and they get cut in training camp or what have you.
It's going to be a great opportunity for football players. It's going to be a great opportunity for guys like you and me who want to break in to a lot of this business. No. I mean, you never know. I'm currently doing play-by-play. What if I get a chance to call games for the Maulers? Now, that would be amazing for me. I would be on it, man. I mean, that's the one chance I want right there. Please, if there's anyone out there, we need to get radio games for the Pittsburgh Maulers, and I am openly throwing my hat in there as someone that could be a part of that because I want to see this in person. I want to be a part of this, and I want to have a story to tell about this league at the end. If it goes on forever or if it goes on for about 3 years like the first incarnation did. Whatever happens, I want to be a part of this.
You want to be on the next 30 for 30?
Yes, man. I want to make my career come true. That's what I want. Again, we'd like to thank you for over 100 subscribers on YouTube. Be sure to follow us on all of our social media platforms. You can get this podcast just about anywhere that you can possibly think of where to find a podcast at, be it Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, whatever. Just go ahead and download this podcast. And again, thank you so much for your support, and thank you for tuning in to the Renegade Blitz. Thank you for listening to the Renegade Blitz podcast. Follow us on Twitter at Renegade Blitz, read articles on renegadeblitz.com, and like us on Facebook. Our podcast is available on Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, TuneIn, Stitcher, YouTube, iHeart, and Spotify.